many thanks. Friends, we've got about just under a quarter of an hour now for question panel. I understand all our panelists are still on the call, so that's really great. And also, members of the panel, you yourselves may wish to ask one another questions. Here in the chat, there's a question from Benjamin Ellis, who's saying, where does the panel think we should prioritize our energies in our different traditions? Should we be sharing the stories? We've seen the power of these stories, people's experience. Is that where we should be focusing on? Or the questioner asks, should we be trying to develop more theological arguments? Is it about testimony or about argument, or what combination of those? All five are on my screen. If you'd like to speak in response to that, it would be if you could put your hand up. That would just be super. They're all waiting for someone else to speak. Mickey, yes, Mickey first, please, and then Brandan.
Only because I'm standing at a lectern that if I get out the way, then Dilwar can speak as well. Thank you for the question. Where should we focus our energy? And I think the question about storytelling is a really important one, because that humanises. The difficulty if we stand on dogma and stand on particular doctrines is we stop seeing the human being at the heart of the question. So focusing our energy on telling stories and on creating spaces where conversations can take place that are safe, even when the people in the conversation don't necessarily start from the same perspective. So for me, an important part of making change is about keeping the human being at the centre of the question and about creating safe spaces. And as institutions, religious institutions, church leaders, other faith leaders, can play a significant role in creating those safe places for good, open conversations that keep the human being at the centre of the question. Thank you.
Great. So we'll go to you, Brandan, please, for your response to that question.
Totally. Well, I think it's an important question, and I know so many people in this space are wrestling with it. And my understanding in the work that we've been able to do here in the US has been that a three-pronged approach is really important. One, being in relationship, forming real person-to-person relationships is what we have found to actually change hearts and minds in the long term. And so I think this is something Jane Ozanne embodies so well, and we've done work together on this front. Forming relationships with non-affirming religious leaders as LGBT people, I think has tremendous power to actually transform the conversation. I also think there is definitely a space for theological reform and doing that work of uncovering a theology of inclusion within our traditions. But ultimately, I think that is work for the benefit of the LGBT community primarily. I've never, in all of the work that we've done here in the US, the theological argument hasn't been what has changed people's hearts and minds. It's been people encountering both the relationship with an LGBT person, but also coming to terms with the harm that is being done. Because this is the last prong that we use a lot, and it's most non-affirming leaders don't have any idea that their teachings result in tangible, verifiable psychological harm. And so if we can get that information in front of them, if we can share those stories with them and show how studies have shown in the US that LGBT people that grow up in a non-affirming religious environment are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide. I think it's that combination of personal relationship, putting the statistics of impact in front of senior religious leaders, and then also advocating for an inclusive theology that, when done together, actually has the power to create transformation.
Thank you very much. And Dilwar, if we could hand over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to be presumptive about what will work for others, but I can tell you what worked for me personally, because my own journey into this, and I want to balance what I said with, I don't want to be presumptive and sort of somehow present answers for people and be on a moral high horse. I come from a very conservative tradition and had to go through many different, quite difficult discussions with people, but also within my own self, with my own religious beliefs and theology. And what really worked for me, I think, are probably three things. One, meeting people and just learning the sheer anguish and pain that people are facing, the dilemma. Because to some Muslims, being gay is like a lifestyle choice. Unfortunately, that's how some people see it, as a piece of clothing that you can put on or take off. And when they recognize that there are Muslims out there who are on the brink of suicide because they can't reconcile their sexuality with what is supposed to be in the dominant narrative, their religious identity, they're torn apart internally. Seeing that pain, unfortunately having to see that pain, but seeing that pain and recognizing the anguish of that person, the very genuine, sincere, soul-searching anguish of that person, you can't not be moved by that. And if you are not moved by that, then there's something really wrong in your religious sort of sensibilities. That, combined with an openness to constantly thinking about your religion in new ways, and that combined with the third thing, and that is just being humble, being able to listen, being able to hear the voice of others, and not always feel that you have everything, you have the whole truth, and everything you believe in is fully formed, and that there is nothing new to learn. If you start from a position of humility, you're open to thinking about your religious tradition, and you hear the pain in people's stories, I think you will be moved.
Dilwar, thank you very much. That's profound. Friends, if you've got any other questions, there is time. Just while you're thinking of your question, just something from me in the context of what we've just been talking about. This sense of opening difficult conversations. Of course, it's much more frightening for some than for others, and yet without the courage of those people in opening conversations about who they are, the conversation can never begin. And in some of the chat when Dilwar's main speech was on, people were saying, how can we deal with institutions where people will just never address these things? And so I think certainly for me in Liverpool here, I have two colleagues, a same-sex married couple who work with me here in Liverpool. And one of them in particular has made it his vocation to enter those spaces, to find the support himself for what he needs to enter those spaces where actually the beginning of the conversation is that he's simply not recognized as a person who's done anything else but made a sinful choice. And I think we do, those of us who are or who know people with that calling, the calling to enter those difficult spaces, we need to make sure that they have all the support and all the prayer in our different traditions that they need, so as to do that, because from their own vulnerability, they can change the world. I'm looking hopefully for any questions from the chat. In the absence of that, friends, the four of you on the screen, if any of you has a reflection to make to any of the others, if you'd like to reflect back on what you yourselves have heard, then do wave to me and you'll get the focus. Come on, friends, you can do it. Help me. Thank you, David, you're a star. So David, please.
Paul, just to resonate really with what you've just been saying about the need for safer spaces, I think that goes right to the heart, certainly, of what churches are about, indeed what all faith communities are about. And it speaks to something deep and profound, and there's a significant intersectionality about this too. I think faith communities that have grappled with being a safe space over all sorts of issues and groups are much better equipped, perhaps, than others to facilitate these conversations. I speak in my own journey growing up. The church that was down the road from me was the safe space for me in my life, and that's what ultimately led me to doing what I do. And running throughout all the work that we try to do in our little community in Essex is trying to ensure that everybody feels safe and that they belong and that they feel welcome. Often we find people connect with us first actually because they're looking for a safe place and a place where they can be part of a community, where they can flourish and be themselves. And working out what that means in the context of faith almost comes second often in those conversations. And so creating those safe spaces is not just important to us theologically, but actually I think it's a huge part of the gift that faith communities can offer the world. It's a way in which we can actively seek to be a blessing to all those around us, whether they're part of our faith community or not.
David, thank you very much. Now, two things have happened, friends. First of all, there's been an explosion of questions. Well, there have been two on the chat. But the second is that we're approaching time for our screen break. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just read the questions to them, and then I'll explain what's going to happen next. And now two more questions have come up on the chat. There's one about making space for non-affirming colleagues. How do we... there is certainly, in my own experience in the Church of England, everyone is terrified that those who oppose them are stronger than they are. And so relatively conservative colleagues just live in fear of the popular culture. And of course, if we were setting up a conservative theological seminar, we would not get a minister of state to come and speak to it. So how do we make safe space for those who are frightened by these conversations? And a whole bunch of other questions have now appeared on the chat, which I will digest and make sense of in the screen break, because in 55 seconds. We're going to have a 15-minute screen break. So thank you for putting your questions in the chat. Thank you for responding to my invitation. I'm sorry not to be able now to ask this panel those questions, but we will review them in the screen break. A huge thanks to all four of you for the contributions that you've made in this part of our conversation.